So welcome to Futures. This is our programming, our summer and fall programming, where we talk about youth justice and youth advocacy. We are so excited for our guest today, Rebecca Cervenak. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Rebecca. Although we can't hear our audience, I'll read her bio as well. Rebecca is the program director for Prison Yoga Project Ohio and a practicing attorney. She has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a Juris Doctor with a specialization in creative problem solving. As a nonprofit attorney, Rebecca spent several years working to reduce incarceration, improve conditions of confinement, and increase access to trauma-informed programming throughout California. While living in San Diego, she completed her YTT in 2017 and the Prison Yoga Project training in January of 2018. In the fall of 2018, Rebecca moved back to Cleveland and assumed the role of program director for PYP Ohio. She facilitates yoga in juvenile and adult facilities and works to expand PYP's programming throughout the state. Rebecca coordinates facilitators who are trained in PYP's trauma-informed approach and leads workshops on best practices in the criminal justice system. She also handles disability cases and represents youth as a court-appointed guardian ad litem in dependency and delinquency cases. Everyone, welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for making time for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for being here. I can see the comments coming in. Can't see everyone's faces, but I'm glad that you're all here.
And we usually like to start off with a centering opportunity. It's an opportunity for you and I to co-regulate and kind of get into our conversation space. And then it's also an opportunity for our audience to join us as well. It's always an invitation, but will you lead us in a centering opportunity?
Absolutely. Yeah, so let's start in a comfortable seat and close your eyes if you're comfortable or soften your gaze. And I will offer some suggestions for movement, things that feel good in my body. But remember that yoga is always your practice. So if you've been sitting in a chair all day and you want to stand up, you're more than welcome to. Whatever feels good in your body, you don't necessarily need to do what I'm doing. Presenting to all of these people, of course, I feel my heart starting to race slightly. So I'm going to start just taking a moment. I'll close my eyes and you can join me in just taking a few deep breaths. Inhaling through the nose, maybe exhaling, opening your mouth, really letting all the air come out. I like to take a lion's breath, big inhale, and on the exhale, bring out my tongue and one more deep breath. And on an inhale, raise your hands up over your head. Exhaling, rolling your shoulders back. And bringing your hands to heart center, taking a moment to check in. Another deep breath here. Feeling your feet on the floor. Feeling the parts that are touching the earth, taking a moment to ground down. Letting go of anything that happened earlier today. Trying not to worry about things that are coming up. And just taking a moment to be present. Another inhale, let's reach our arms overhead. And on an exhale, we'll twist, bringing our arms to a T or down over your chair, whatever's comfortable for you. Taking a breath here. Inhaling back to center. And on an exhale, we'll take it the other direction. Then just moving with your breath. Inhaling back to center. Another moment to notice the sensations in your body, rolling your shoulders back, maybe doing some neck circles, anything that feels good to get out any tension in your body so that we can focus here with each other. And if you'll join me for one more deep breath, ending with a lion's breath, inhaling. And big exhale. Thank you all. Namaste. So I typically start my juvenile classes with a little bit more movement. The youth, before we go into a short centering, like to shake it out, getting rid of all that tension. I think it's helpful for them to release some of that extra energy. But, really to center, I like to just take a moment and focus on my breath and do what feels good in my body. So the way I lead my youth classes, obviously after a very short breathing centering, we do a lot more movement because, obviously reading the energy in the room, sometimes they're more tired. So we do a more yin based practice,
But I like that. Starting with shaking and removing any excess energy really so they can be here and shift any nerves or extra excitement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is your first memory of yoga? What was the first time you heard yoga? Or maybe tell us about the first time you did yoga or went to a yoga class.
Sure. So I first went to a yoga class in college at my college on-campus gym. And in hindsight, it was not really a yoga class. It was more of a yoga Lattes type workout. I, full disclosure, left during Shavasana because I couldn't stand just lying there and I hated it. So it wasn't the best experience. So it wasn't until about a year later, I was actually studying abroad in Australia, and I went to a yoga class right off the Great Barrier Reef. And that was the real yoga class. It was my first experience with a real yoga class. And it changed things for me because, as you can imagine, I'm multitasker and a little type A. So I'm constantly go. So for me, being able to take those moments to just breathe is very challenging. So I will say in the early days, I was going mostly to stay in shape. I liked the idea of being more flexible. I'm an avid runner, so increasing my speed. I kind of frankly got started for selfish and, other reasons, but the more I went, the more I realized how beneficial it is. So I hadn't actually intended to teach when I did my YTT. I really did it for more self-exploration. I was in law school at the time, practicing regularly, and then I was a practicing attorney. So it wasn't something I was, thinking of as a career path. It was really just to deepen my understanding and get better acquainted with my body and my breath and, the practice of yoga. So, but meeting Bill and Kate in San Diego and doing my prison yoga project training, it really all came together for me because, as Blair mentioned in my bio, I've spent a lot of time working in the criminal justice system. So I did teach in a studio for a little bit just to get my hours and some practice training, teaching actual classes, but I've solely taught in the system since 2019.
Amazing. Was there an instant that it kind of shifted for you, that it changed from your personal practice to a service-oriented practice?
Well, I don't know that there was an exact moment, but I've always been a service type person. My whole life has been dedicated to helping people and trying to improve conditions. So being able to share my practice with other people was always kind of, I don't know that was the goal, but I love teaching in the system. So when I found out that was an option and I met Bill, like I said, and I just knew that it was something I needed to do. And I had no interest in teaching in a studio, even though I think it's wonderful the people who do. And I have some really great teachers in studios that I've gone to. That's just not a role that made sense for me.
I feel like this is a thread in when we speak to program directors and facilitators within Prison Yoga Project. that so many of us just felt a deep sense in our heart that this is the work that we wanted to do and this was who we want to serve.
Yeah.
And then we just continue to follow that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you find out about Prison Yoga Project?
Bill and Kate came and did a 3-hour weekend workshop at the yoga studio across the street from me. So thought it sounded interesting and was very interested in learning more about a trauma-informed approach. I was living in San Diego at the time and went to a lot of different studios and was just having a hard time really finding one that felt right. As you can imagine, Southern California, there's a lot of Beachbody, Core Power type studios where I just never felt safe or comfortable. I was always very competitive, and being a competitive person, I was really struggling with it. So I was practicing more at home until a studio called House of Yogi opened across the street from me. And I just started going to almost everything they were offering because they did such a beautiful job. And so I signed up for the workshop and been with Prison Yoga Project since.
Wow. That seems like a really beautiful gift, especially having it be across the street, right? As well.
Yeah.
Like this gift just presented itself to you.
Yeah, I could just walk across the street. It was really, really nice.
It's so nice. Let's start with your education as well. So what did you study in school and how did that inform your choice of getting into criminal justice and youth advocacy?
Sure. Well, I went to public schools in Cleveland, which unfortunately is still one of the most segregated school districts in the country. It's pretty horrific. I saw a lot of racism and classism and things in high school that really didn't seem fair to me. So I went to Bowling Green State University, about an hour and a half west of Cleveland, and majored in criminal justice. Got a minor in philosophy, and really studied the philosophy of punishment and, the difference between punitive and, rehabilitative practices. I wasn't intending to go to law school. I'm not really sure what I thought I wanted to do with it. I always thought changing policies and practices and, reducing mass incarceration was really important, but didn't want to be a politician. So, kind of towards the end of my undergrad, really, most of the people in my criminal justice program were going to be cops or probation officers. And I knew that that was not a role for me. I did a paid externship at a community corrections and treatment center where kind of like a halfway house where people are able to get out of the prison early. They're still living in a locked facility, but they're able to check in and out to go to work and things like that. But that really wasn't a good fit for me. So I signed up for law school. I applied to one school in San Diego because I always wanted to live in San Diego. It's beautiful. Got in, and they had a really interesting creative problem solving track. So, in law school, you have to take all the basic classes to take the bar, obviously. I had to learn property and torts and all kinds of things, but my electives were all towards creative problem solving. So we looked a lot at the war on drugs and mass incarceration. And so even in law school, I was able to keep working on, trying to end mass incarceration. I did a couple stints with the public defender's office. I worked in juvenile delinquency, and then in the drug court, did some felonies. And after law school, was going to join the public defender's office, had an offer there, but got a unique opportunity with a nonprofit in California called Disability Rights California. And they hired me as a school to prison pipeline fellow. So I started with a year fellowship representing youth with disabilities in suspension and expulsion cases, which, we know the more kids are kicked out of school, they're more likely to end up incarcerated later. So trying to help get more services, mental health counseling, behavioral health, whatever the kids needed, and not be suspended or expelled from school.
Will you share maybe more personal stories or kind of what you experienced when you were working for this nonprofit or like the wisdom that rose from these experiences?
Yeah, so disability rights, every state has one. It's a federally funded private nonprofit program that are run in each state. And there are a bunch of federal laws that govern these protection and advocacy agencies. So part of our federal authority and our federal mandate is to go places where people with disabilities are in order to do investigations. And so started in schools, and we also did some work in sheltered workshops, which is where people with disabilities make sub-minimum wage. There's a loophole in our laws that allow people to make literally pennies for working. It's supposedly job training, but you see a lot of people with developmental disabilities, especially working in these sheltered workshop type programs where they're making, 10 cents an hour or something horrific, and, doing all of this work for these big corporations, really getting taken advantage of. So we did a lot of work to try to get people into more competitive employment. And not exactly sure how I transitioned from that, but I got very interested in doing investigations in the jails and juvenile halls. So we used our investigation authority in order to start touring the different facilities. And so we actually were able to go in and talk to people, especially people in solitary. I would talk to people through the windows in their solitary units. We'd go into the day rooms, and, I'd sit at a table and talk with the people who were not in their cells, but going around talking to people in their individual cells. It was really eye-opening because my experience working in the community correction center, it was different. Even though it was still a locked facility, you really just didn't get the picture you do inside. And even working for the public defender's office, I would be able to go in and interview, but they had attorney interview rooms. You don't see what we were able to see, behind all the locked doors. So being in some of those solitary units, it really opens your eyes. And so we brought some class actions to, get people out of solitary confinement, have some more time in the day room, have some mental health services. We were able in a lot of different counties to get more services in so that people could have better access to medical and mental health care. And the dentist, things like you're just primarily pulling people's teeth. And that was, pretty horrific. And dental hygiene is so important, but a lot of the counties don't care. But that was something we were able to get brought in, which was great. And so part of that too was, increasing yoga. I met some people in the San Diego County Jail who were teaching prison yoga project there. Was able to observe some of their classes and, try to work with the different facilities to expand funding throughout California.
And working with these, going in and like in doing your investigations, was there a theme that you saw maybe in these kids' stories? Was everyone really individually different, or was there a place where you kind of saw that everyone fell off at a certain point?
Well, I think for the kids and the adults, my focus now is primarily youth. And I guess it's always been a bigger part of my work, but even with the adults, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the ACEs study, but all these adverse childhood experiences, most of the youth in the juvenile facilities that I've toured, and there's been a lot of them, or that I've, facilitated yoga in, they don't necessarily have the best home life. They're don't have a lot of good influences, or going to schools that, are suspending and expelling them. They're really not getting an education, or don't necessarily feel like they have options. So, I think that generally our society is still pretty segregated and really does a disservice to people who don't have money. And not that, people who are wealthy don't end up being, incarcerated for other reasons. But I do think primarily most of the people that I've seen don't come from much and don't have, the resources to really pull themselves up by their bootstraps, because if you don't have boots or straps, how do you do that? So I think, and I do think even with all of the resources, some people make choices that aren't the best. I certainly believe in autonomy, and I have seen people do really great things coming from not the best situation, but I think it's our society's failing. We're failing to educate people appropriately. We're failing as a village to support each other, to be there for each other. There's so much greed and people being selfish that it's heartbreaking, really.
And I know that I said, like, following someone's journey, like where they fell off. And I think that's where we as a community fall short, right? That like we don't have these safety nets, and we don't have the community that if someone stumbles, that we can catch them, right?
Yeah. And I think, I'm happy to see that there are more, ban the box advocacy, and more employers giving people, second chances. But part of my work as an attorney, I represent people in Social Security disability hearings. And, when you pay Social Security taxes, you are basically, it's an insurance type premium. So that if you become disabled before retirement age, and you're unable to work, that you can have, a benefit while you're getting your medical or mental health care, whatever you need to get back on your feet and start working. We get, I don't know, probably 10, 15 calls daily from people who can't work because of their criminal record, who cannot find jobs, who cannot find, they're calling saying, and it's hard for me because I want to be able to help people. And I do think that there needs to be better program for that. But unfortunately, they don't necessarily meet the criteria legally to get Social Security. But these phone calls that are coming in, people who have disabilities, and all they can find is factory work, but they don't have the physical ability to do that. But they can't get a lighter or sedentary job because of their convictions. And so I do think, people who, I don't necessarily agree with anything that we do, but I think it's particularly problematic that we have people serve a sentence, but it follows them for the rest of their lives. If we really don't give anyone a second chance, even some misdemeanors prevent people from working. So, and if you don't have stable employment or income, again, so much of this comes back to the resources, where you don't have wealthy parents, or, you don't marry into money, it's just constantly setting people up for failure. There's so many barriers with a criminal record.
So when these 10 and 15 people are calling, and they're kind of, again, they're not being caught by community or any services that we provide, what do you guys tell them? Like, what do you send them places? Do you give advice? Like, what do you guys do?
It depends on the situation. There are resources, scarce, but there are resources in the area, and depending on the person's needs, we refer to mental health or medical providers. There's a housing agency here that helps people get Section 8, or helps with non-Section 8 mental health housing and services, so that people, can get back on their feet. There's a lot of job agencies around, places that help with job training, or at least are supposed to help with job training. So we do make a lot of referrals. There's unfortunately not as many resources as there should be, and not everyone gets help from them for one reason or another, unfortunately. But I certainly try to help. We are a busy law firm, and we have a large staff that I need to pay their salaries. So it was different in a nonprofit. I was able to help a little bit more, but I think part of the reason I love the firm that I'm working with, is because we do so much extra. We recently hired a social worker to be on our staff to help our clients in the meantime, and that's not something most law firms do because, frankly, my job as a lawyer is to win your legal case, right? But that's not enough for me and the two men I work with. So we give back to the community a lot, but we also decided last year we brought in a social worker to help people connect to different services. And so she's constantly going out and networking and meeting people and finding resources and trying to help our clients and or just people who call us looking for help to connect to other resources to improve their situation. So.
Wow. And tell us your journey or your transition from the nonprofit to the law firm that you're at now.
Yeah, so I moved across the country. So I was with Disability Rights California, and a lot of things happened at once, just with the housing market and for me personally, and it just felt like the right time to make a move. So I put in my notice there and moved back to Cleveland. I was going to work for Disability Rights Ohio, but their office is in Columbus, which is about 2 hours away from my family. And I figured if I came back to be close to my family, I should be close to my family. So Michael actually found me. He was a friend of a friend on LinkedIn and asked me to get coffee. He was super interested in the work I did for disability rights. And we just went out for coffee one day. And at the end of our meeting, he offered me a job. So I said, I don't know that I want to go private. I wasn't really interested in doing Social Security benefits. I just, I kind of never, I don't think it's a bad thing, but, working for disability rights, I was trying to help people get employed. So for me, it was like, wait a minute, I'm going to help people get onto Social Security. I want people to help people get off of Social Security and into competitive employment. So, but this firm's just so wonderful, the things we do. And we don't just do Social Security, we do discrimination. So people who are denied sign language interpreters or other types of barriers. And then I do the court-appointed guardian ad litem work. So the juvenile court here in Cuyahoga County appoints me to represent kids. So if the child is has delinquency charges and the parent guardian caregiver is the alleged victim, then I'll get appointed to represent the child, not as their criminal defense attorney, but as their guardian ad litem, because the parent is, the adverse party. So they'll still have a criminal attorney, but I represent the kid's best interests. And then same thing in dependency. So if the county is trying to either put the child in protective supervision or some sort of other temporary custody or permanent custody placement, I get appointed as a guardian ad litem to help determine what's in the kid's best interest. So that's something that I'm able to do here. I have the flexibility to kind of do things I care about. And I do think the delinquency dependency, it's a lot of the same population of youth that I see in the hall. So trying to connect them with services and, all of our social services agencies are so understaffed and underfunded, it's challenging, but being able to connect those dots for people and, just be someone that they can actually count on, I think matters.
I want to hear more about that work. And I know that you also are starting to do representation for a new organization that's called 0 to 3, or like a new initiative, right?
Yeah. So the 0 to 3 program is, there's a national nonprofit that focuses on babies. So they, 0 to 3 is so important for cognitive development, for, learning about attachment and having positive or negative interactions with other people in your life. And so children who obviously are abused, neglected at any age have some pretty negative side effects, but especially from 0 to 3, because even though, we think a lot of babies don't remember, it's so important for your cognitive development. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but so the 0 to 3 program really focuses on helping children who are in the dependency system and their families get more services. So, a general abuse, neglect, dependency case, CFS or Child Family Services is involved, kind of, they check in once in a while. they'll place the kid with a different family member, but then, 6 months go by and then we have a review hearing. So what we're doing with the Safe Babies court team is we have one judge who's basically taking all of the 0 to 3-year-olds who get dependency cases, and we're having them in one courtroom, and we're having more regular meetings. So we're having a monthly check-in where we're meeting with the family to figure out what services they need. The parents who agree to participate in the Safe Babies court get much more visitation with their children. So instead of, once a week or every other weekend, the parents are still very actively involved in their babies' lives so that they can continue that attachment. And, obviously being hooked up with more organizations, housing, job training, whatever, the parents need to get in a better situation so the child can safely be reunified with their parents.
And, maybe we'll have you on again to talk more about the system, right? Because it's like, I feel like it's such a complicated process. I just did I just became a yoga teacher at a school. So I did like a California mandatory, what are they? I should know what I'm called. Like, I am obligated by law to report any abuse cases, right?
You're
like
mandated reporter.
Mandated reporter. Thank you. That's the language. And so, like reading, it was like a 4-hour program, and you're reading about the system. And it's like, we really do everything that we can to keep the children with the parents. Maybe
that's what's supposed to happen.
Right. That's their copy for the organization. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see with these families? Like, I love that you guys are showing up for the families and you're seeing that the relationship is so important. Where do you feel like they're really shining with these services, and where do you feel like there needs to be more focus or improvement?
Well, every family is different, and I've been trying to do trainings with the prosecutor's office. I think that the people who go into the child abuse unit of the prosecutor's office have good intentions, but I think that in my experience, some of them have become pretty jaded and are pretty nasty to the families. And obviously there are some bad situations. You've got a 18-month-old with bruises on their ribs, or moms, got arrested for drugs and the baby's has drugs in their system. I mean, it is hard not to judge or shame, right? But no one wants to be a bad parent. No one's doing this maliciously. Most people have bad situations and want to improve. So I think, there are some parents who put a lot into it and want to do better and, go to their counseling sessions and put in the work. But I also think it's really challenging. I mean, some of the things that they require, they require everyone to go to AA, and not everyone has an alcohol problem. And they're requiring, some of it's just so boilerplate, right? So if your kid gets taken away, you have to do X, Y, Z, and it's somewhat the same for everybody. And I don't think it's individualized enough. And, I have one mom right now. So she has a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they're currently in foster care, and she's trying to get them to come home. But she can't until she meets her case plan goals, which are secure housing, which she's done, go to mental health treatment. She goes to an Iop program 4 days a week. They want her to go to AA 3 times a week. And they want her to go to get a job. She can't find a job because she's in a mental health program 4 days a week and going to AA twice a week. So, I think it's sometimes a little bit unrealistic. But the parents who I do see most of the kids getting reunified with their parents. Unfortunately, sometimes it happens that something else, permanent custody to the grandparents or to another family member, it does happen. But I think group homes is really the last resort. So we try to place people with a relative if we need to, and then with a foster or adoptive parent if we can. So, but we do have some kids who end up in group homes until they age out of the system, which is hard.
Which is interesting because that's also a population that you serve through Ohio Programming, right? Just really quick, even from my own knowledge, and because I don't know it, maybe our audience doesn't either. What's IOP programming?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
It's an intensive outpatient program for people with mental health and substance abuse issues. So it's typically several hours a day, and it's like group therapy in different structured settings so that, they can work on whatever addiction or mental health issue challenges that they're having.
So this particular mother was going 4 days a week. So it's like several hours, 4 days a week on top of any AA meetings. And then they're asking her, to get a full-time secure job. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for informing me of what IOP is. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Sorry, I live in a world where we use a lot of acronyms. So if I don't spell things out, please ask me, because I know when I first started, it was alphabet soup, and it was almost like people were talking another language. I'd be like, wait, hold on. What does that mean? So,
what is that? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So we were talking about youth going into group housing. So will you tell us about all of the programming that you even include pre-COVID, right? So what is all of the programming that you offer in Ohio, and maybe the populations that you serve as well?
Yeah, so our adult programs have halted since COVID. So we're not really doing anything in the adult prisons right now, but we are hoping to, in the Ohio Women's Prison here in Cleveland, it's called the Reintegration Center, but they also have a specialized court docket so that women who are 6 months from release get put into a special court docket, into a special unit where there are additional services. So we should be starting programming there sooner than later. They keep pushing it back because of COVID. I want to see programming throughout the entire prison, but we got to start somewhere, right? So it's 6 months before release, they get hooked up with, more job services, employment agencies. We help people who don't have a driver's license work on that. And we're going to be offering trauma-informed yoga in that unit, hopefully sooner than later. And then we're in a lot of juvenile facilities. So like most states, there are local county juvenile halls, and then there's also the statewide juvenile prison-ish system, DYS, Department of Youth Services. So when our youth are arrested, they either, go home on some sort of community supervision, or they go to the local county facility. And then after they're sentenced, they have a disposition in their case, because their juvenile terminology is different than adult. They're not, convicted or found guilty. They're, it's a true finding of fact. And then they are given a disposition, which can include being placed in DYS, which is, basically a juvenile prison. There are 3 in Ohio, one in Cuyahoga Hills, which is on the east side of Cleveland. And Prison Yoga Project's been teaching there for almost 10 years. And we have a really good relationship with them. There was a grant from Cleveland State to do some research. So you should be seeing some blogs and information with some data and research that we collected over the last 2 years there, which of course got delayed because of COVID. But we had some grad students coming in and doing some pretty interesting surveys and studies. But we have a good relationship with DYS. So there they actually let us bring in blankets and bolsters. And we've had a lot of different facilitators, including myself, over the years. We do trauma-informed yoga, and we also do some music therapy. So we have, people come in with bowls and chimes, and it's pretty interesting. So that program's been pretty great. And then we are also in several other of the county facilities. So Lorain County, Medina County, Summit County. We have some paid and some volunteer programs. And we just got a grant. Actually, next Monday, September 13th, we are going to Cuyahoga County Juvenile Hall. We just got a very nice grant. We're going to be doing our tour and background checks, and I able to hire 3 facilitators. We're going to be doing 5 classes per week. So every unit, there's 5 housing units. Every unit in the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Facility is going to have yoga weekly. And we are part of that contract is doing research and data collection. So working with Prison Yoga Project, we've got pre and post surveys. We're going to do qualitative and quantitative, if Nicole's listening, qualitative and quantitative research, so that we can report it to the court. And they've asked me to do a trauma-informed presentation to all of the judges in the juvenile delinquency court. And hopefully, if this 36-week program, we got a grant to do 36 weeks, it's 3 different 12-week cycles. If that all goes well, hopefully we will be able to increase and offer classes twice weekly for each unit.
Amazing. I want to hear more about the facility that you're going to be teaching at and offering programming. And then I also kind of want to hear why it's so important to do all this data tracking, right? And so how that shows up on the legal side as well. So maybe tell us about the facility first. I'm gonna close my window really quick.
What do you want to know about the facility? Just the different types, or how many?
Yeah, just tell us more about the facility that you're going into with this new programming, because I know there's different, there's different housing units. So yeah, just tell us more about what's happening in that facility.
Yeah, so well, I'll back up in the other facilities. So Lorain County, we have programming there, but Lorain County is thankfully a pretty small county with a very small youth population. So I was teaching 2 classes a week, facilitating 2 classes a week, where I had 15 to 20 male youth for the first class, and then they switched out, and then they brought the female youth in, and there were anywhere from 4 to 12 female. So we were able to actually provide yoga to all of the youth in the facility on a weekly basis.
Amazing.
And right before COVID, we brought in, excuse me, a second facilitator. So the youth were actually getting yoga twice a week from different facilitators. You know, I was doing Tuesdays, she was doing Thursdays, but I think that that's good. I think there is something to be said about having the same facilitator, being able to develop rapport and kind of know what to expect. And, you know, having the same youth over and over again, you can kind of read the room, you know, and figure out what's working, what's not working. I do think there's some benefit to that. But having different facilitators to figure out different approaches and, you know, kind of having different experiences, I think is great too. Summit County similarly has a small population. So there's anywhere from 4 to 15 youth, and they have the same facilitator, Ashley, every week. She's been doing it outside since COVID. They didn't really make her stop for too long, thankfully, because she wasn't allowed to facilitate indoors anymore, but they had her facilitating outdoors when the weather permitted. So they were able to get youth to yoga to all of the youth there. And that's actually a paid program. So she's actually paid for her time, which is great. And similarly in Cuyahoga County, because Cuyahoga County is in Cleveland, for those of you who aren't familiar with Ohio, and it's huge. There's a lot of youth locked up here. The juvenile detention facility is connected to the courthouse. So I'm in the courthouse pretty regularly. Thankfully, the juvenile hall's right there, so I can kind of go back and forth. I don't facilitate in the detention center because I'm an attorney in the court. There's a conflict there, but I am the program director. So I oversee all those programs. And when it was volunteer-based, we couldn't reach everybody. We didn't have enough consistency. You know, people were kind of coming and going, and we could only do so much. So now, thankfully, the county has realized how important it is. So they've, put their money where their mouth is and are, going to pay our facilitators a good wage to come in and do weekly classes, and not just for one unit. We're going to do it for every unit. And you asked about, so the data is important because that's part of how we got this grant, right? We were talking about, I don't know if anyone's seen, I know, for me, Ohio is obviously where I'm from, and so I'm seeing the news all the time, but Cuyahoga County's got a pretty bad rap for our system. And there was, a riot a few weeks ago in the juvenile hall because it was understaffed, and so the youth were placed in solitary conditions for almost a whole week with very little out of cell time, and there ended up being a huge riot. And it's, kind of, there's been a lot going on, and some of it has to do with understaffing, some of it has to do with training, but I think that they've, even from the volunteer work that we did, that wasn't as consistent or regular as I wanted it to be. I think they really saw the benefit that the units where we were facilitating classes, the youth were sleeping better. They were, reporting less anxiety. There were less fights. I mean, stuff that we all see in our daily practice. And I know I'm, again, preaching to the choir here, but they saw that, maybe anecdotal, but they saw enough of a benefit that they want to do the research, that they're going to provide the funding for us to do some data collection, so that then they can go, to the powers that be and say, look at all of this benefit, so that we can hopefully get more money. And, that is part of why this is so important. I mean, I think that the qualitative is important too, to just get the anecdotes from the youth about how yoga has changed them individually. I think that is so important as we touch individuals, and especially, those of us doing this work know, at least, for me, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the starfish story, but it's, there's a bunch of starfish that are washed up on the beach, and there's someone, there's a girl throwing them back into the ocean one at a time. And, an older man comes up and says, oh, you can't possibly save them all. And she shrugs her shoulders and picks one up and throws it in and said, well, it made a difference for that one. And I think that gets lost so much today, that, we're so much on quantity and how many people it can affect, but making a difference for even one of the youth matters. And so I have to remind myself of that sometimes when I have a particularly challenging group, because, teenagers can be challenging, and don't always necessarily have the buy-in, especially in the beginning. But I have to keep reminding myself that if even one of the youth sleeps better or feels a little less anxiety, it's worth it. Unfortunately, our grantors and funders and judges and politicians don't really care about that one person. So that's where the quantitative data is really important to pull in. There's less fights overall. Numbers have decreased, recidivism rates are decreasing. The big picture, how they're going to save money in the long run, is really the way that we can persuade them to pay for these programs up front. Some of the politicians around here, as with everywhere, but Ohio's still pretty conservative. And a lot of the politicians around here see yoga as some hippy dippy BS, and are like, oh, why do we need to teach our kids to touch their toes? It's stupid, right? So really coming in with the research showing, neuroscience and how this all works, with supportive data, is the only way I can figure out to get people to write us checks. So, and I think that's important, coming back to the consistency. I think It's wonderful that people are able to volunteer, but one, this work is really important, and I think it should be paid just like we pay mental health counselors or other types of therapy, because I do, obviously the Prison Yoga Project trauma-informed approach is so therapeutic and beneficial. But it's a different demographic when it's not all volunteers. We're able to bring in people of different ages, different backgrounds, and I think who can potentially connect better with the youth and provide, an even better class. So.
And really, it's that consistency. And you talked about having the relationship, right? And the relationship over a period of time, and like really having a sustainable program is being able to compensate people so that they can show up weekly. Right. And so it's just like this kind of thing that continues to feed each other. Right. And we're like, okay, if we have consistent programming, we're going to have, not that we do this for results, right? But it's like there will be great impact on the people that are going through the program. Right. And then that will lead to whatever it is that the politicians and people making decisions about money and where resources go, right? Then it brings more resources in. So it's this it's really, when we pay facilitators, it is beneficial for everyone. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what is your personal practice, right? Like what I'm hearing is that, and so I do think we have a wide audience here today. Maybe people are program facilitators, maybe people are totally new to PYP. And so a lot of what we do is that, like, if you want to bring in programming to a local facility, it's kind of going to fall on an individual's motivation to get this done, right? Like, we can provide you with all of these resources, but what I really love about you is that you speak all of these different languages, right? Like, not only are you a facilitator and you're going in and you're speaking to the kids or the adults, but you also are able to speak the legal language and working with court, and really, like, you can speak the language of the system. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to anyone wanting to start programming?
Well, I don't think that it is definitely beneficial for me that I can speak all the different languages, and I have, connections in different arenas, right? It's helpful that I know judges. It's helpful that I know people in the system, but there's always connections. I mean, we were going to start programming in the Lorraine prison. And there's a yoga teacher who, he worked for Pepsi for 30 years and then decided to open a yoga studio. He happened to have a friend who knew the pastor who worked in the prison and got in that way. It had nothing to do with me. I got a phone call saying, hey, we want to, start this programming. Can you help us work on, the contracts and things? So there are always different connections, that it's just asking, do you know anybody who works in the facility? Or it's, approaching them. I think there are more and more people getting invested in yoga. One of the things at the Cuyahoga County, one of the people that really helped me push this through practices herself. She's a yogi, so she understands the benefit of yoga. And so, once I talked about bringing, more consistency to the yoga program, she was like, I love yoga. I do yoga. Let's do it. And so it's just getting the right people to buy in, I think, and really being persistent. This has been over a year in the making. And there were a lot of times, I mean, Nicole and some of the other program directors can tell you, I mean, there were weeks where I was just like, it's not going to happen. Nobody's calling me back. They said they were going to do this, but they never sent me the contract. There's a lot of, especially the last 2 years. I mean, COVID made everything particularly challenging. And I think less people want to be correctional officers. So there's a lot of staffing challenges throughout the country, and that's making things extra challenging. People are constantly putting out fires. So it's really being persistent to get yourself in there. And, in my experience, if you if you go in for free, there are pros and cons, right? Some programs we started for free and wanted to show them how good it was and hope that we would get money. And we've been volunteering in those facilities for years. And, thankfully the facilitators we have there are financially able to do that, but it's not sustainable for real programming to have a real reach. So, trying to get using this data and research. I think Prison Yoga Project has a ton of resources. I'm personally happy to talk with anyone about, contracts or budgets. Nicole, who I think Nicole's on the phone. I think I saw her in the chat. She's done a lot the last few years to come up with facilitator guidelines that, we've read from. There was one of the, I don't know if it was a recreation director or something, was asking us about, religion and how is this going to be related to religion, which was also a big issue in Alabama because of the way that their laws are. They had to call it stretching. But, we were able to read a really nice quote from the facilitator guidelines that encourage the, prison to understand where we're coming from. And we've got a bunch of contracts now. We have participant agreements. We have waivers. I've done a lot of legalese the last few years. And, it's definitely a change because Prison Yoga Project's growing and trying to become more unified and on the same page. So, but, these are pretty standard documents that most nonprofits have. So we, I think having a written contract with the facility definitely helps both sides be responsible. When the expectations are clear about who's supposed to be doing what. So I'm happy to help talk with anyone about that. And Nicole has, been an amazing resource helping me with budgets and things like that. So there is some money in the budget for a program director and program coordinator to do the, kind of behind the scenes organization, grant reporting, that sort of thing. So we're paying our facilitators, but we're also paying program coordinator and program director to make sure that the funding keeps coming and hopefully expands.
Which is incredible. And for anyone on our call as well, Nicole is our amazing assistant director of Prison Yoga Project. So yes, thank you always. Thank you always, Nicole, for just being simply amazing and all of the work that you really help facilitate for us to do, really just like making it easy for us to be able to go in or being able to pitch programming. So really just organizing everything for us. So thank you. And I'm going to ask you one more question, Rebecca, and then we'll transition it into Q&A with our audience. Nicole says, I basically tell people what to do. Thank you for carrying it all out. Yes, and we love you for it. Thank you. So with all of the things that you manage, really, what does your practice look like?
Well, it's changed. Not having a studio across the street means I have to drive somewhere. Mm-hmm. COVID has also changed things. Although I will say for me, once all of these studios started doing these online options, I was able to rejoin my favorite studio from San Diego and jump in on some of their live classes so that I could, still be a part of that, even though I'm here. But I try to do an hour or so practice at least a few times a week. It's hard for me to find that time, but I always take at least 10 minutes in the morning. And I try to do 10 or 20 minutes at lunch and 10 or 20 minutes at night. I don't get to do full hour, 90-minute classes as much as I'd like. I typically do at least every weekend, a longer practice. But I think even, a 10-minute chair sequence at lunch makes my afternoon so much better. Even just sitting in my car before I go into court and doing, 5 or 6 deep breaths makes me more level-headed. And I'm sure most people on the call know the benefit. So I was stuck in a rut for a little while where it was like I didn't have an hour to dedicate to a full class. So I wasn't doing anything. And then I started having some, not good side effects. So even just doing the 10 minutes in the morning makes a huge day and a huge difference. And the not having time thing's hard, right? Because it's not a great excuse, because we all have the same amount of hours in a day. And it's really what do you prioritize? And I do work a lot. I have 3 different hats that I wear. So there are a lot of different moving pieces, and it can be a challenge. But I've never done yoga and thought it was a waste of time. So, sometimes at night I get home and 8 o'clock at night and I'm starving and I'm exhausted and I'm cranky and I'm like, I'm not going to do it. But if I do 20 minutes, it makes a huge difference. And sometimes you start with, I'm just going to do 10 minutes. And then an hour later, I just did a whole hour. It's not necessarily a video. I do what feels good in my body, which I think is what's the most important. Even when I do yoga classes or yoga sequences, sometimes I do my own modifications or do a completely different pose just because that's what my body needs at the moment. So try to just pay attention to what I need. Not sit like this at my desk, because that's bad.
It's erasing all of the work that we do, right? Yeah. No, thank you for sharing your personal practice, because I'm, as an observer of your story and how much you really give in service, as, program providers and facilitators, we know that it's important to keep our cup full as well. And not only the work that you do, but also on top of the pandemic that's happening, right? I feel like so many of us really are just feeling flatlined. So thank you for sharing that. And it's really inspiring too. Just you know what, it's 10 minutes is enough, and do it a couple times. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I'm going to get back in the habit of doing longer practices, but for now, it matters. Just 10 minutes.
Yeah. And it's just enough, right? It's enough to shift us into a different state, a different mode. Dennis just said something sweet, I think. Thank you for sharing. I also have witnessed the change practice can bring to the individual, right? Yeah. And that's I think what we talk about in Prison Yoga Project too, is that really us continuing with our own personal practice, because we are the container for whatever room that we go into, really honestly, whether we're teaching yoga or not. So continuing to maintain our personal practice. And I know we talk about that in our yoga teacher training too, really, that's the foundation of our work.
Yeah. And I think, my rut started when the pandemic started, because I couldn't go to my local studio, and it just was I'll do it later. I'll do it later. I'll do it later. And I wasn't facilitating classes. So I didn't have, I want to say the pressure, but when I'm facilitating classes, I do practice more, because I want to, think about my sequence. I want to make sure that I have a whole cup. But, once the pandemic hit, I just got out of the habit of it. And I'm really glad that I was able to, start doing more again, because it does make a huge difference. I noticed a huge difference in my mental, physical well-being for, the couple months that I just wasn't making time to take care of myself.
You're at least on my end, I was why is my life exploding? Why is this? You're oh, okay. It's oh, yes, practice is so important.
Yeah. Why am I so tired? Why can't I sleep? Why am I snapping at everybody? Because I was too busy to take time to help myself, which was making everything else worse. So
just Bill and I were talking about yesterday, just just continuing to recommit to the path, and we're okay, maybe we start to wander, and then we're oh, we're thick in the forest. We're okay, yeah, no, we're gonna walk back.
Yeah. Well, and it's a practice, it really is. And that's the same thing with, my law practice. It's everything. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm just doing the best I can and keep practicing until, I keep improving, hopefully. But there's ebbs and flows for sure.
We have a question from Sonia. She asks, what are the predominant disability types or categories that you encounter for those who are incarcerated?
Mental health, for sure. I mean, I think there was a study I read recently, like 70% of people who are incarcerated have some sort of mental health condition. They're not all necessarily in, like, most jails or prisons have like a mental health unit, where people with more severe mental health issues are all kind of kept together. But there are people on mental health medications throughout all of the facilities. And there are people who have mental health conditions but aren't taking medications. So I would say that's definitely the biggest category. And not necessarily, the ones you think of as like they're really severe, right? Of course, I've seen people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and, some of the more unique multiple personality disorders and those, but really it's more anxiety and depression. People who have anxiety, ADHD, and, haven't really found good ways to cope with it. And, or, I mean, I don't want to get too much on my soapbox, but, years ago when we defunded all of the mental health hospitals, it was supposed to go into community mental health and it hasn't. So it pretty much, at least in California, we just moved a lot of people from the state hospitals into the jails and juvenile halls because we're not providing community services. I mean, I had a couple different men in the Santa Barbara County Jail who were incarcerated after suicide attempts because they didn't have beds in the trauma units. So instead of being able to be in a mental health facility, they threw them in Santa Barbara County Jail. We filed a lawsuit there if anyone wants to look into it, because that was a big mess. And you would think Santa Barbara, somewhere with so much money, pretty affluent area, there's still a lot of poverty up there and not a lot of resources. So we really need to do better to treat mental health in this country. But I do see other, there are people with all kinds of disabilities, physical, invisible disabilities that are, internal, but I definitely, mental health is the most significant.
Sonia was responding. She said there's the same issues here in Australia, people with mental health issues who end up in incarceration rather than getting appropriate assistance that they need.
Mm-hmm.
And then she also was adding on, do you provide yoga programming to those who are in mental health units?
Yes. Depending on the facility. Mm-hmm. So Sonoma County had a mental health unit that they said were too severe for people to facilitate in. They basically just locked everyone in cages, but we were able to get them to add some programming so that we could do some more programming in the main unit. It depends, if the person is a threat to themselves or others, the jail has safety concerns, right? So I understand that. So there is an extent where we can't facilitate classes in a way that's productive. But I think that the mental health units need this programming so much, just as, everyone does. I think everyone should have access to yoga, but it's always frustrating for me when, I push back when they say that the mental health units wouldn't benefit from it or can't do it safely, and it just comes to proving them wrong, right? It's not always easy. It can be incredibly challenging. But again, showing them the benefit of it and that, look, we really can do this and it can be really beneficial and it'll be helpful for your correctional officers when people are having less episodes. But not all facilities are on board with that. And, so we do kind of, that's like at the women's jail, they won't let me teach in the solitary unit. but we're going to start in the 6 month, which I think frankly are the people that need it the least, right? Because they're in this 6 month program where they're getting access to all these additional services. It's great that we're going to do it in there. Hopefully when they see that benefit, they will let us in the more restrictive unit for the people who really, really could benefit so much.
I really feel like this work of yoga as service, we'll just put it that way, right? Like yoga as a service, providing a service, right?
Yeah.
It really feels that we're at a precipice, that we just keep doing this work and we have enough research and we have enough of this qualitative and quantitative research that at some point in time, it's just going to explode. That everyone, this is what I'm at least hoping, or what it kind of feels like, that it's going to be like the floodgates are going to open and everyone's really going to be seeing and hearing the benefits of programming. And then people are going to be, you know, this is my hope, that my dream, that people are going to be almost like scrambling for services, right? They're like,
I hope so. I really do. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's interesting because there's been a big national push the last few years to, reduce solitary confinement, right? There's been bills passed that we can't keep youth in solitary. There's been a whole lot of movement, but these are things, when I was in high school and college, that we were all pushing for, a small population. And so it's been so amazing for me to kind of see it building and all of the changes that have, I wouldn't say happened suddenly because there was so much for so long, but it was kind of, a very, very gradual uphill. And then all of a sudden, we made so much progress in a couple of years. And I think I'm seeing the same thing with yoga. So hopefully we can keep riding that wave and really get a better reach to more people.
I hope so too. And especially, right, because like the pandemic has highlighted our severe mental health issues in this country. And so, I mean, we're really going to be, I think, healing from this. Not like it's over, right? But like, right, we're still really in the midst of this. And so hopefully it will just keep rising to the priority of conversations of just like really that we need like federal radical mental health services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bill just said that it took 10 years for PYP San Diego to make their way into the ADSEG units, administrative segregation, for anyone who's not familiar with ADSEG, which is basically solitary confinement units.
So again, right, coming back to that consistency, right? It's like, okay, like if we can keep showing up, we can have more impact and we can get into more places that really need yoga. Mm-hmm. Dusty asks, how are the conditions or support for LGBTQIA youth who are incarcerated?
Depends. It depends on where you are. In California, much better than in Ohio, for sure, but not good. There are more resources and there are more laws protecting people, but there is still a lot of stigma and a lot of discrimination and a lot of safety. Don't want to say safety concerns because I frankly think it's nonsense, but for people who haven't fully transitioned specifically, they put a lot of trans females, they don't recognize them as female, right? Especially if you still have your appendages. They'll put them in a male facility, and that can be incredibly challenging and traumatizing. And in my experience, many people who may end up in ADSEG for their own protection. And there's been a lot of science, a lot of studies, a lot of anecdotal stories about, the negative effects of solitary confinement. Humans are social creatures, so locking people away with no interaction can be really challenging. And the fact that they say that it is in the youth best interest is troubling, to say the least. But that's my experience has been seeing many youth unnecessarily put in administrative segregation for their own protection.
Do you see or have an opinion on alternative solutions? Obviously that one that feels like a strong no, right? But is there a way, since you work on both sides of the system, do you have any creative ideas or?
Well, we need to stop locking kids up, period.
Yeah.
There are no benefits, in my opinion, even for youth who are more, have more violent crimes. We just have to stop locking kids up. There's been so much research and, thankfully more and more over the years, but kids need to be in their communities, right? It's something that in California, thankfully, moved more and more kids out of, they just changed their name again, DJJ, DYS here, and the prison systems into county facilities, because there's all of this research that kids need to stay connected to their community. They should be close to their parents. They should be close to their school districts. They're going to do so much better transitioning and have less recidivism if they're not shipped up to some state prison 6 hours away from their home, right? So that's at least a step in the right direction for me. But, in California, there are 58 counties. In Ohio, I think there's 88. So there's also some trouble with leaving counties up to their own devices, because every county juvenile detention center is a little bit different. There's not as much oversight or uniformity. So, there are some challenges with that, but I do generally think it's better for kids to be closer to the communities. But, there are so many. There are unlocked facilities, there are rehabilitative programs, there are mental health or substance abuse treatment centers, there are ankle bracelets. There are so many other things. Not that I want anyone wearing an ankle bracelet either, but if the option is lock this kid up or send him on house arrest, give him the bracelet. Because there is an extent where we have to, understand the community's concerns about safety and things like that, but we need to just stop locking kids up, period, which would help all of the, diverse populations that are particularly punished by the system. So
thank you.
Getting on my soapbox again, sorry.
Oh no, that's why we have you here. That's like we're giving you the box to stand on. Yes, that's what this is.
We need more community services, I guess, is the moral of all of that, right? If we have prevention, if we have mental health services, if we have education programs, if we have job training and interviewing skills and things to help people educated and employed, statistics show people who are actively employed are less likely to end up incarcerated because they're busy and making money. And it's just, there's so many things we could do to improve people's lives that would prevent incarceration in the first place, or help people who have done something reintegrate, as opposed to being locked up away and actually coming out potentially worse, more dangerous, more less likely to get a job and more likely to keep reoffending and just keep the revolving door going.
Speaking of working with kids as well, Nicole asks, the kids in my classes will often share that they are anxious for their court date. What tips can I offer them about managing their emotions during court? I talk about breath, etc., but I'm curious if you have anything else.
Yeah. Breath is really important, obviously, but I think it can be hard for youth, especially, to really focus on their breath. I mean, even for me, I remember even when I was, in college, being like, okay, breath, whatever, take a deep breath. My 5-year-old nephew, when he's throwing a tantrum, I tell him to take a deep breath and he rolls his eyes at me. So I like to work on different types of mantras or counting. I have one youth who really likes to use his fingers. And I tell him, to breathe and tap her fingers is a really big one for this particular youth who had a lot of trouble sitting still, right? Shaking, moving, kicking, all that energy. So I think a short yoga practice before you go, if you can do some movement to, again, shake it out, wiggle your arms around, whatever it is, to kind of get rid of some of that excess energy. But then he sits with his hands underneath the table, and just taps. So, or counting some sort of mantra, I am strong, I am okay, whatever it is, just repeating it tends, in my experience, to help more than just focusing on breath, because I think it almost backfires sometimes for me, for some of my kids. They start getting more shallow breathing and start almost panicking because they're not breathing right. So I like to try to incorporate more movement and counting backwards, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I really like this solution.
Mm-hmm. Gives you something to do with your hands too, so you're not as fidgety.
Yeah. And especially when they're sitting,
Mm-hmm.
right?
You can do it under the table so that no one's noticing, right? It's not something that anyone except the person sitting next to you would notice. So, yeah.
And what would you like to leave our audience with? Is there anything that we didn't talk about today, or anything that we didn't kind of bring into the conversation that you want our audience, anyone on Facebook or anyone that might hear this future recording, to know or to look into or think about?
Well, I don't know. I think just I'm glad I was able to be here and talk with you. And I think I'm glad for everyone who came, because this is such important work. And I'm glad that we're, finally starting to expand. I think I would just like to leave with, I think we really are moving in the right direction. I mean, we're seeing a lot more rehabilitation type programs. I think as a country, obviously we still have a really long way to go, but I do think we're moving in the right direction, and more people are realizing, the importance of mental health treatment and trauma informed practices. And, moving that way is really, really helpful. And the data is important, quantitative and qualitative, being able to share stories and also show, the big impact. Just got to keep collecting the data so we can get people to pay to improve our programming, expand our programming. And, like I said, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to share articles. I'm happy to work with anyone to help reaching more people, even if it's just helping that one starfish. I think it's worth it. So hopefully we can all collaboratively help a lot more together. So thank you all for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for being here, and for, your decades of throwing the starfish in, and just kind of being at the front lines and supporting everyone who really needs an advocate. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you to our community who showed up today as well. If you are here live, or maybe here in a future recording, we offer a foundational training, which is really an incredible opportunity for you to see a little bit into our criminal justice system, into our history, and about the lens of yoga through the criminal justice system, really, right? So it brings you into the view and the foundation of the work that we do here at Prison Yoga Project. It's a completely virtual training that offers 4 live digital meetups as well. So you get to meet more people in the community. And it's not just for yoga teachers. It's really, we want everyone to do this program. So I'm going to drop the link into our foundational training. And there's a few different price points in which you could access this work. If you are someone who can give more, there's a higher tiered option, and that goes towards people who might not be able to afford our training. So we invite you to register at whatever level feels comfortable for you. And if you can give back to the community, we really say thank you. As far as future events that are coming up as well, we have another webinar coming up on Monday, who we are interviewing Ali and Ottman Smith of the Holistic Life Foundation, and they run an organization, Holistic Life Foundation. We're focusing on disrupting the school to prison pipeline. They went viral a couple of years ago for a program. So they work in the Baltimore public city schools, and they started with a school where they, instead of assigning detention, they would send the kids to meditation, yoga, and mindfulness classes. And so that program went viral a couple of years ago. And so they just do incredible programming. So we're excited to host them too. Thank you, everyone. I know that we dropped Rebecca's email in the chat as well, in case anyone wants to reach out to her personally. If you know anyone in Ohio that's looking or wants to do programming, please connect them with Rebecca. And again, thank you everyone so much for being here today. And Rebecca, thank you for making time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.